Hi. So here I'm going to try to put some thoughts together that may help you in terms of understanding key points of the readings and some of the written exercises that follow, plus just trying to cover some of the sociological concepts and insights that are so useful for understanding this middle portion of the semester. And when I say middle portion, I know we're going to bump into the end before too much longer, but about inequalities. Okay, so as I mentioned, I think yesterday in, in the video material I might have sent you, this is the overarching concept for Henslin's chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10 is inequality. And in chapter 7 is the global nature of inequality, including inequality among societies of the world. Chapter 8 is social class in the United States. Chapter 9 is race. Chapter 10 has gender and age. But, the theme, there are many, many insights that come from all those chapters, but the umbrella, as I like to use that phrase, concept under which those chapters fall is the idea of inequality. Okay, so a couple of things to, sort of move it along. Normally, I stress very heavily to students as we begin to discuss, in class, the insights surrounding inequality, the concept of life chances, life chances, life chances. So just to make sure that you understand what I'm referring to, when sociologists talk about the importance of things like, race and class and gender, one of the most helpful concepts to attach to those realities is this idea of life chances. And what does that mean, life chances? Well, it simply means what it sounds like, right? The chance you have in your life to live a longer, healthier, happier, more successful, safer, contented, productive life. Right? Wow. Quality of life, right? Quality of life, quality and quantity of life, length of life. Okay. How long you're likely to live, and, with what degree of success, both personal and, economic, are you likely to live that life? So what we know is that there's variation, right? Not everybody enjoys the same quality of life. Not everybody lives to the same ripe old age. So these things vary. They vary, these life chances are affected by your social class, by your race, by your gender, in a variety of ways. So it is a very significant, I think, a very significant concept. In a way, what it does, is answer the so what question. So what? So what? I haven't mentioned this to you before, I don't think, but I sometimes have told students, all right, so you get this interesting material in sociology. You learn about impression management, for example. Uh, the test is at least partly that some of you should subject the material to is that so what question. So what? So what? So what? We manipulate the impressions we make on other people. So what? What's the consequence? So we're socialized both intentionally and unintentionally. So what? Okay. Anyway, you get the point. The section on inequalities, class, race, gender, have huge, huge implications of a so what nature. There's class inequality. So what? So what? So what, you say, about social class? It makes a difference in almost every way in your life. Okay. Having said that, also keep in mind, we know there are exceptions to every generalization of a sociological nature. None of the things we say will pertain 100% of the time to 100% of the people so designated. Okay. So just keep that in mind. All right, some other things I wanted to just quickly go through with you and And I'm going to break this down. I'm not going to talk forever. I'll talk for, I don't know, 15 minutes. I'll stop. I'll send you another one. Okay, so this concept that you've had to address in reading the essay from the New York Times and responding, the idea of headwinds and tailwinds. Okay, I think it's a wonderful concept. I really do like it. Headwinds and tailwinds. I guess it's two concepts. Headwinds and tailwinds. So the headwinds are all the obstacles that you face, right? It's like trying to jog against the wind, throw a football into the wind, hit a baseball into a really strong wind, and would-be home runs get blown back in the fly balls. Okay, trying to ride a bike, bicycling is a good one, into the wind. Throw a frisbee into the wind. You get the point, right? You get the point. Stop it already. So these headwinds are obstacles that we face, and we're pretty aware of those. We see them when we run into them, or we feel them when they affect us. What we're less often aware of are the tailwinds in our lives. Those things that make traveling easier, that add distance to your throw or your batted ball or your frisbee, that make it feel so much smoother to skate or bike in the direction you're heading because you have the wind at your back, not in your face. The idea of tailwinds, we sometimes don't pay attention to the tailwinds that have functioned in our lives that help explain how our lives wind up. And then when it comes to inequality, I would suggest to you that much of the difference is as due to the tailwinds that some get that others don't, as it is to the headwinds that some face that others don't. Okay, so at some point you want to just keep that in mind, and maybe the best example of what you need to know about this does come from those two videos, the $100 race and the Detroit Public Schools. So to use the terminology, the $100 race is a way of trying to illustrate by having people take steps forward, right? Take 3 steps forward, or take a step forward if you've always lived with 2 parents. Take a step forward if you never had to worry about where your next meal was coming from, right? Take a step forward if, right? And these are things that perhaps we're not even aware of how they're affecting us, and yet they help. They help push us along in life. They help, they add to the kind of success we might have. If you had tutors before you took your standardized tests to get into college, take a step forward. Anyway, those kinds of things, those are the tailwinds. And so I think the $100 race, when at some point he says, all right, stop, turn around, look behind you. And you see so many people who didn't have those advantages, okay, makes us aware. Okay, not everybody benefits in the same way from some of the things that we've experienced as tailwinds. The Detroit Public Schools is also a nice, useful illustration of headwinds, right? Having the things to overcome, things operating against us, against some of us more than others, and how they can factor into where we wind up in life. So nothing in those concepts, headwinds or tailwinds, should diminish in any way your sense of pride for being students at the College of New Jersey, or your sense of accomplishment for whatever scores you got on your standardized tests or grade points you've earned. Okay, you deserve that pride and that credit. They belong to you. You've had to achieve. Okay, so this doesn't negate any of that. What it does is it maybe just makes us maybe just a little more sensitive to some of the sociological context within which we've been able to achieve those things. Okay. All right. So let me deal with you a little bit with the sources of inequality, that the 3 chapters in your text. What about these? How do these actually work? to make for differences. So you have class, you have race, you have gender. Right? What are these concepts? I mean, how do they work? Well, social class is a they're all major concepts in sociology, but I think sociologists really tend to seize on social class as a dominating factor in explaining various kinds of behaviors and lifestyles. And certainly, we no doubt know, right, that is the concept that Annette Lareau chooses to emphasize in Unequal Childhoods, right? Unequal Childhoods is about class differences, right? Class, race, and family life. Yes, and Lareau does deal in a very interesting way with both class and race, and the ways in which they do or don't impact the kinds of areas of family life that she's trying to address. Okay, but what is this thing, right? What is this concept of class about? How does it factor? So obviously class is an economic variable. What it does is it divides society. You can either see it in terms of layers, right? Some have more, closer to the top, right? Or we could say, yes, there's a ladder in which there's many rungs, the lower class, the working class, the lower middle class, the upper middle, anyway, right? Different rungs or different levels of society. Stratification is not an originally sociological concept. It comes from geology, the layers of the earth. Okay, so if just like the earth is layered, sociologists talk about society as being layered into classes, with those in the higher classes being those who have more. Have more what, you may wonder, right? All right, so what does class consist of? Well, those who have more economic resources, we tend to group together and say people who share in common the economic status in their life, their class. Okay, conventionally, we might talk about the United States in terms of the upper class, upper middle class, lower middle class, working class, layers, right? Classes. How many? How many are there? Different theories, different versions of class mention different amounts of classes. Your text in chapter 7 and 8 looks at that in the United States, and in a very good way. So I, just refer you back to Henslin and, read through that, and you see some of the ways in which life varies in a number of different areas. So, your life chances in a number of different areas, health and happiness and, wealth and whatnot. So these economic layers, these economic groupings, right, share a common fate, right, common opportunity structure, right? The more you earn, the higher your income, the more you can buy, the higher the rent you can pay, or the bigger the house you can buy. And so, we just group the population, break the population into groups who share common economic standing. And those are your classes. So it's an economic variable, very obviously. Among the economic aspects of class are two: wealth and income. Okay, your wealth is the value of what you own. How much do you own? What's the worth of your house if you own a house? What's the worth of your car if you own a car? What's the amount of money you have in stock, right, in ownership of other things? Money in the bank, right? All of that amounts to your wealth. And what we know is that wealth is very unevenly distributed in the United States and in most societies, all societies really. So part of the economics of class is wealth. Part of the economics of class is about income. Income is what you earn, right? The amount of dollars you're paid per week, per month, per semester, per whatever for the work that you do. Okay, so income and wealth are the two, practical economic aspects of your class. Class also has potentially a cultural aspect to it. And This is a reminder of that, okay? Now your text talks about, Hensland, not Leroux for the moment, talks about a concept, the culture of poverty, and rightfully critiques the idea of the culture of poverty. The culture of poverty was an explanation for poverty in certain population based on the kinds of lifestyles that were lived by poor people. So, if poor people don't realize that, you can't just sit around, get high, you gotta, be serious, work, right? Save money when you can, plan for the future, okay? So if you can't do those things, if you can't live up to that middle class cultural lifestyle, then man, you're going to be poor, and it's going to be your fault, or it's going to be the fault of your culture. So the culture of poverty says that poor people are poor because of the kinds of lifestyles that they live. Their culture comes under great criticism by most sociologists. When we see differences of lifestyle kind between classes, sociologists tend to see those, Hensland says this, tend to see those as products of different class position and not as the cause of your class position. But anyway, back to the point, in your text, it questions the value of a culture of poverty or a culture of class. I do think Leroux in Unequal Childhoods is illustrating for us that there are some cultural differences across classes in the area, in this case, of family life and parenting in particular. Okay, different philosophies, different strategies, different values. You might see it that way, different values, right? What is it that middle class parents are trying to achieve for their children by the style of child rearing they use, this concerted cultivation style? What is it that working class and low income parents are trying to accomplish by the style known as the accomplishment of natural growth? What does that tell us about the beliefs and the values across class? Okay, so I do think you can say that, there is some evidence there of a cultural aspect to class. Okay, so far we've got strictly economic in terms of wealth and income. We've got this cultural dimension or cultural aspect of class to an extent, and not mentioned in your text really, but to an extent there's a psychological aspect to class, an identity aspect, in which what we seek from other people is some sense of self-worth or value. We want respect from other people, right? We want them to look up to us, not down at us, or at least eye to eye with us and not down at us. And in this society, United States, how people react to us is heavily influenced, not solely, but heavily influenced by the work we do, which is a kind of aspect of our class. Occupation is right there with income and wealth as an aspect of social class. The work you do, the money you make, and the wealth you own. So not everybody, for the work they do, is seen as equally important or equally respectable, deserving of prestige from their occupation, and that kind of eat into one's self-image. Okay, so if you work in a job that nobody respects and everybody thinks is like a very unappealing, unattractive job, or something left only for people who can't do anything else, right? You take that home with you at night. It can affect your sense of self. Conversely, if you're in a job where, just the mere mention of it, oh, a professor at the College of New Jersey, gets you a certain kind of respect, you internalize that. You take that home with you. Okay. So the way I'm asking you or suggesting to you that we conceptualize class would have those different aspects to it: material, economic aspects, income, wealth, occupation, cultural aspects, right? Not cultural poverty, but lifestyles that do reflect some differential values in areas like child rearing, and then psychological, right? In terms of either the benefits that you get from others of a social reputational kind, or the, you know, ways in which other people's reactions to you actually are kind of almost like injuries to your well-being, blows to your self-esteem. So that's the more psychological aspect. So that's where I see class. I'm just going to quickly do race and gender, and then I might pause and come back with another one where we say, all right, let's take those and let's apply it to one area of social life. Let's look at how that all spills out into family life. So class is an economic variable with these different dimensions. Race, what is race? What is race? Race is a supposedly biological concept. We say supposedly for very good reason, supposedly because even biologists don't think it has much value in terms of, you know, talking about meaningful differences in populations. But it's supposedly biological groupings that share in common certain biological characteristics: skin color, texture of your hair, facial features, eyes, and other things. And we group people based on the sharing of similarity in these regards. Okay. Race. When we see races in the population, we identify. And what Henslin, you know, this is one of the points I stressed in the written material. I think among the very important points in chapter 9 is the idea that race is both a myth in the way in which we think it has real biological meaning, but it's also a reality in terms of how life is lived. Okay. And the whole idea about how is it both a myth and reality. So it's a myth in that there's not really these identifiable homogeneous races in the wider, you know, population of human beings that we can sort people into. There's overlap, right? There's they bleed into each other, like these characteristics. Take complexion, just complexion as one, right? The darker your skin, right? So in what category do we place people? There are people who self-identify as African American whose complexion is lighter than mine. Okay, so, you know, skin color. And then the idea ought to be, right? So what would it be about the color of your skin, or the texture of your hair, of which I don't have much, or the features on your face, your eyes, the shape of your eyes, for example? How might that really matter in terms of what you're capable of, or, you know, what your talents are, or any of that? Okay. But the supposed biological groupings of people who share in common these features are what we've meant by races. And so the myth is that there are identifiable numbers, that they're homogeneous, and that there's a dominant race, or that there's an inferior race, that some racial groups are somehow inferior to others, is also mythical. So what's real about race? Walk out your door. Carefully, obviously. You would not want to be around too many people today or in the near future, you know, quarantine at home, etc. But in a normal state of things, I say, take a walk outside your house. And of course, that'll vary depending on your own set of characteristics. But people react to us based on their perception of our race. And the twin concepts of prejudice and discrimination give race great meaning in terms of affecting life. So the reality of race is really a creation of the beliefs we have about race. In that case, you know, this grand self-fulfilling prophecy. We believe people are different because of the color of their skin, so we act towards them as though they're different, more or less capable, more or less trustworthy, more or less intelligent, based on the color of their skin. And as a result, we create differences of an unequal kind amongst the population. So that's the reality of race. And it may be harder for me as a Caucasian man to convincingly talk about the impact of race when I walk out my door. Talk to any African American who has ever gone shopping in a store and been the subject of somewhat suspicious clerks, or a Latino, we do it to age groups too. So younger people do, just by virtue of their age, wind up arousing certain kinds of suspicions and mistrust. But on a racial kind, this is very real. Okay. The other really important distinction, and again, I mentioned this in the written material, is the difference between discrimination of an individual kind. I don't like people of a certain kind, and so I treat them badly, or ignore them, or put them down. That's discriminating, and it's on me if that was the case. Institutions can have discriminatory impact. And as you read through the Hensland material, I think you should, sensitize yourself to seeing that difference. Individuals discriminate. Oh, how can we change that? Oh, they must be prejudiced. We'll work on prejudice. Institutions can discriminate when just the day-to-day functioning of their policies has a different impact on different groups. Okay, so anyway, back to this. So we have economic variable of class. We have a supposedly physical characteristic known as race. Ethnicity is a cultural variable, right? Traces to the culture of where you're from. So we talk about white ethnics, Italians, Irish, Poles, Greeks, etc., Middle Easterners, and Latinos, and possessing ethnic similarity. Okay, in that case, it would be shared cultural characteristics, shared language, shared customs, and we would see society broken up into ethnic groups of people who share those things. Ethnic groups like racial groups. In some ways, we really lump the two things together, even though one is supposedly physical and the other is supposedly cultural. Sometimes you see the term ethno-racial. So that we're saying, for example, African Americans are both a race and an ethnicity. Okay. The sharing of characteristics of either a cultural or a biological kind puts you in a racial or ethnic category. And the last that I would mention to you is gender. What kind of variable is gender? Gender is it is a biological variable. Well, it's a component of our biological sex that encompasses how we see ourselves, our identities, and the kind of opportunities we have given to us in the wider society, the roles we're asked to play, and what those responsibilities associated with those roles look like. And so our gender. So sociology looks at how each of these impacts social life, how each of these is expressed in society. And in Hensland, as in every other intro to sociology textbook you would pick up, you'll see different chapters on class, on race, on gender. As people, as real whole people, right? We really can't pull out which part of this experience is due to my race versus my class, right? They're interconnected. They intersect. Really significant concept known as intersectionality. And what intersectionality tells us is that you have to understand the combination of statuses that people possess, because your life is shaped by that unique combination. So, for example, yes, we can talk about gender, what women face, what men face, what women's opportunities are relative to men's. That may vary if you're African American. That may vary depending on being middle class or not. So you can, start to divide. Yes, I am a Caucasian man. I'm a Caucasian upper middle class man. I'm a Caucasian upper middle class man of a certain age. All of a sudden, it's all of those things that intersect that really explain my experience, because I have good colleagues that I left behind in Ohio who are upper middle class white men half my age. They have different experiences. Or an upper middle class African American man of my age would have different life experiences. And obviously, very obviously, an upper middle class woman versus an upper middle class man has different life experiences. So that's like, it's pretty important to remember that and see that. Okay, I'm going to pause and see how long I've been rambling, and I will shoot you another one of these that continues the focus. All right. Stop.